Have you ever wondered why the nicest people you know seem to carry the heaviest weight? You know the ones I'm talking about. They're always available, always accommodating, always wearing that gentle smile that never quite reaches their eyes. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. They say yes when their entire being screams no. They've become masters of reading the room, curating their responses, managing everyone else's comfort zones. And yet, underneath that perfectly polished exterior, something is quietly dying. Today, we're going to talk about people-pleasing, but not in the way you might expect. Because people-pleasing isn't really about being nice. It's about something much more complex, much more painful, and much more human than our culture wants to admit. It's about the slow, systematic betrayal of the self. The mask we mistake for identity. Carl Jung wrote extensively about something he called the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate the world around us. The persona isn't inherently problematic. We all need some version of social adaptation to function in complex human environments. But here's where things get dangerous. What happens when you can no longer distinguish between the mask and your actual face? What happens when the agreeable, accommodating version of yourself becomes so practiced, so automatic, that you forget there was ever anyone underneath? This is the trap of chronic people-pleasing. It's not just about saying yes too often or avoiding conflict. It's about mistaking your survival strategy for your identity. You see, somewhere along the way, maybe in childhood, maybe in early relationships, maybe through cultural conditioning, you learned that your authentic self wasn't safe to express. Your anger wasn't welcome. Your boundaries were inconvenient. Your needs were too much. So you developed what psychologists call the fawn response, a sophisticated survival mechanism where you appeased others to avoid rejection, conflict, or abandonment. And it worked. For a while, it worked brilliantly. The architecture of self-erasure. Let me paint you some pictures. You might recognize yourself in these archetypes. First, there's the peacekeeper. The peacekeeper moves through life like a diplomat in a war zone. They've convinced themselves that keeping everyone happy is their sacred duty. They avoid conflict at all costs, not because they're naturally peaceful, but because they've learned to confuse approval with safety. Their flaw? They believe that other people's comfort is more important than their own truth. The consequence? Chronic self-erasure, exhaustion, a life lived in service to other people's emotional regulation. Then there's the curator. The curator has turned likability into an art form. They know exactly what tone to use in emails. They know how to smile in meetings. They've become experts at performing emotional labor for others. Their flaw? They prioritize emotional management over authentic expression. The consequence? They feel fake, unseen, like they're living behind glass, watching their own life from a distance. Next, we have the compliance trainer. This person says yes so consistently, so reflexively, that the people around them stop believing they even have the capacity to say no. Their flaw? They've trained others to expect infinite flexibility from them. The consequence? They're used rather than known, valued for their utility rather than their humanity. And finally, there's the Awakener. The Awakener is just beginning to recognize the cost of their people-pleasing patterns. They're starting to set boundaries, starting to honor their own needs. Their flaw? Early guilt tolerance is low. They haven't yet learned to sit with other people's discomfort. The consequence? Temporary social turbulence as relationships recalibrate. But also, for the first time in years, the possibility of genuine integrity. The cultural disease. But here's what makes this so insidious. We don't live in a culture that encourages authentic self-expression. We live in a culture that rewards compliance. Modern society has confused politeness with goodness. We've equated utility with worth. Our families, schools, and workplaces systematically reward reliability over authenticity. They reinforce the dangerous illusion that being liked equals being safe. Think about it. From childhood, we're taught that good children are quiet children, compliant children, children who don't make waves or cause problems. We learn that boundaries are optional, that our needs are negotiable, that discomfort is somehow immoral. And then we wonder why so many of us feel hollow. The algorithms that govern our social media feeds amplify this dynamic. They reward curation over presence. They teach us to optimize for engagement rather than truth. We live in a world that tells us our value comes from how useful we are to others, how little trouble we cause, how effectively we can manage other people's emotions. No wonder we lose ourselves. The primal terror. Let's go deeper, because underneath all of this people-pleasing behavior is a fear so primal, so fundamental, that most of us will do almost anything to avoid confronting it. It's the fear of rejection, of expulsion, of being cast out from the tribe. This fear makes evolutionary sense. For thousands of years, exclusion from the group meant death. Our ancestors who were sensitive to social disapproval were more likely to survive and reproduce. But here's the problem with carrying ancient survival mechanisms into modern life. That fear never updates its threat assessment. Your nervous system still responds to your boss's disapproval as if you might die without their protection. Your body still floods with stress hormones when someone seems annoyed with you, as if their rejection could be fatal. So you learned, very early, that truth was dangerous. That authentic expression was a luxury you couldn't afford. You traded your real self for attachment. You learned to read micro-expressions like your life depended on it. You became an expert at emotional contortion, twisting yourself into whatever shape seemed most likely to earn approval. And the most tragic part? That guilt you feel when you consider setting boundaries? That's not your moral compass speaking. That's withdrawal from approval addiction. Your nervous system has learned to interpret other people's disappointment as a threat to your survival. So when you think about saying no, about honoring your needs, about letting someone else manage their own emotional state, your body panics. It tells you that you're being selfish, cruel, wrong. But you're not wrong. You're just learning to distinguish between actual danger and the echo of old fears. The cost of the cage. So what happens if you don't address this pattern? What happens if you continue to mistake your survival strategy for your identity? The consequences compound in 3 devastating ways. Emotionally, you become a stranger to yourself. Resentment builds like sediment in still water. You find yourself engaging in passive aggression because direct expression feels impossible. You burn out repeatedly, wondering why you feel so exhausted when you're just being helpful. And underneath it all is a nagging sense of fraudulence. The feeling that if people really knew you, they wouldn't love you. Relationally, you create a prison of imbalanced connections. The people in your life fall in love with your mask, not with you. They become dependent on your endless availability, your emotional labor, your willingness to absorb their discomfort. And then, when you finally try to set a boundary, when you finally say no to something, it feels like aggression to people who have become accustomed to your submission. They don't understand why you're suddenly being difficult. They can't comprehend that you were never actually as flexible as you appeared. And identity-wise, the mask hardens into a cage. You lose touch with your own preferences, your desires, your authentic responses to life. You become hollow and directionless, living life in reaction to other people's needs rather than in response to your own inner compass. You wake up one day and realize you don't actually know who you are underneath all that accommodation. The choice that changes everything. Here's where we reach the climax of this story. Every person caught in chronic people-pleasing patterns eventually faces the same fundamental choice. Path A. Keep pleasing. Continue prioritizing other people's comfort over your own authenticity. Maintain the illusion of harmony by sacrificing your truth. The benefits? Short-term peace, familiar patterns, relationships that persist, even if they're built on a foundation of performance rather than genuine connection. The cost? Long-term self-loss? A life lived in service to other people's expectations. The slow death of everything that makes you uniquely you. Path B. Individuate. Learn to tolerate other people's discomfort. Reclaim the parts of yourself you've disowned, your anger, your limits, your needs. Set quiet, consistent boundaries. The cost? You'll lose some relationships. The imbalanced bonds that depended on your endless flexibility will not survive your newfound integrity. People who benefited from your self-betrayal will not celebrate your self-respect. The benefit? You'll finally meet yourself. You'll discover what it feels like to be known rather than just liked. You'll build relationships based on mutual recognition rather than one-sided accommodation. You'll learn that you can be loved for who you are, not just for what you do. The daily practice of self-reclamation. So how do you actually make this shift? How do you unlearn patterns that have been decades in the making? It starts with micro-practices, small, consistent acts of self-respect that gradually retrain your nervous system. Pause before yes. When someone makes a request, resist the automatic urge to accommodate. Take a breath. Check in with your body. If your stomach tightens, if your shoulders tense, if some part of you recoils, honor that information. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to justify your no with elaborate excuses. "I can't do that" is a complete sentence. Change your worth metric. Instead of asking, "How helpful was I today?" Start asking, "How truthful and self-respecting was I today?" Instead of measuring your value by how little trouble you caused, measure it by how authentically you showed up. Learn to disappoint skillfully. This might be the hardest practice of all. Learn to let other people feel disappointed without rushing to rescue them from that feeling. Their disappointment is not a crisis you need to solve. It's information about the gap between their expectations and your reality. Your needs aren't dangerous. They're data. Embody daily integrity. Use fewer words and maintain firmer edges. Follow through consistently on what you say you will and won't do. The goal isn't to become colder. The goal is to become clearer. To let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. To stop managing other people's emotional reactions to your authentic self-expression. The path forward. Here's what I want you to understand. People-pleasing isn't a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. It's a survival strategy that once served you, even if it's now causing more harm than good. The person you became in response to early rejection, criticism, or abandonment, that person is worthy of compassion, not judgment. But that person is also not who you actually are. Underneath the accommodating mask is someone with preferences, boundaries, desires, and limits. Someone who deserves to take up space in their own life. Someone who can be loved for their authentic self, not just their usefulness to others. The journey from people-pleasing to authentic self-expression isn't easy. It requires you to feel things you've spent years avoiding: guilt, disappointment, the discomfort of other people's reactions. But on the other side of that discomfort is something extraordinary: the possibility of genuine intimacy. Relationships built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The profound relief of being known rather than just managed. The chance to live your actual life instead of a performance of what you think life should look like. The choice is yours. Will you continue to mistake your survival strategy for your identity? Will you keep trading your truth for other people's approval? Or will you begin the difficult, necessary work of reclaiming your authentic self? Your spine, your voice, your boundaried number. The world doesn't need another people pleaser. The world needs you, the real you, the version of yourself that exists beneath all that careful accommodation. If this resonated with you, if you're ready to stop betraying yourself for other people's comfort, then subscribe. Because we're just getting started, and your authentic self is worth fighting for.